You're watching the Sunbeam Alpine channel, and today we've got a video from an old friend of the channel, Eddie Zetlein. You'll find him in some of the other videos that are already published on here. Today he's going to show how you can respray your Alpine at home very successfully. Now, Eddie is old school, he does things his way, and this video simply shows what he does and how he does it, and the results that he achieves. I hope that you enjoy it. Thank you for watching.
Hi there, welcome to the Sunbeam Alpine channel. Today we're going to look at something that a lot of owners would probably shy away from, and that's paintwork. How feasible is it to paint your own car? Well, before we start, I'd just like to make it clear that it involves a lot of hazardous materials. You really need to be wearing a hazmat suit, a piped respirator, gloves, and all the other associated paraphernalia with health and safety. What you do in terms of personal protection is up to you. We're not telling you what you must do, we're just showing you what we do. So with that disclaimer out of the way, how feasible is it to do your own paintwork? But one of the things you're going to need is one of these, a compressor. And that one there is probably a little bit bigger than you need. It's a 3 horsepower compressor. And then you're going to need some hose, and the hose will take the air from the compressor and it's going to go to a pressure regulator here. And note there's an oil and water trap just there, and you've got a pressure gauge, and then you run the hose from that regulator to your spray gun. And once you've got compressed air, obviously you're going to put your paint in here and you're ready to spray. And another thing you'll need is a mask, something like this, a respirator, because once you start spraying in here, there's going to be a lot of fumes and you don't really want to be breathing those in. So this is just a general body shop paint respirator. So what else do you need? Well, the paint itself, you've got to decide, what am I going to paint it with? Because nowadays there's basically 3 different types of paint. There's the old-fashioned cellulose, which is what I work with because it's the cheapest and it's the easiest to use, and it's probably the easiest to rectify if something goes wrong. Then you've got 2K, and in actual fact we will be using some 2K paint to start with, because we're going to be putting on epoxy primer. And the epoxy primer is the first coat, and it's very, very important because it will stop any paint sinkage into any filler that you've had to use. And trust me, even though the shell is 100% metal, it's probably about 70% filler as well, because you've got to hide all the joints. So there's going to be a lot of filler in your work, and you don't want the paint sinking into the filler, because after about 6 months after painting it, it will look like a Google map if you haven't used epoxy primer. So after the epoxy primer, you can use standard high build cellulose primer, and then over the top of that you put your top coat. If you want, you can even put a lacquer over the top of that, but I don't, because it just introduces more work and another variable for something to go wrong. So I tend to work in solid paint. HMG, the people that manufacture my cellulose, They do all the roots Talbot colours, they mix it up on site and you're ready to go. We're going to be painting the shell polar white, so that's what I've got. Okay, so today the first part of the build is to actually spray the doors. I've already sprayed the back side of the doors, which is under the trim, what you actually see from inside the car. But now we're ready to actually paint the door skins. These doors have been completely prepped now, they're ready for primer. But this is the but. The caveat is paint does not hide anything. If you've got an imperfection, no matter how small, the paint is just going to magnify it. So you can't get away with crappy prep. You've got to do the prep properly. And here's an example of what sort of bad prep can give you. Look at this door here, this corner. I mean, you can see areas of the door where there's filler been put in, bare metal. You can even see areas where the skin's been grafted on. But just here, that looks alright, doesn't it? That looks fine, until some degreasing fluid on it. And this is one of the things you have to use before you paint. It's a degreasing, it's called panel white, degreaser, prep, anything like that it could be called. And what it does, it removes any grease that's on the surface, because grease and paint don't mix. So you've got to get all the grease off. But it also shows you imperfections when you wipe over the panel with it. For example, look at this corner here, and I go like that. Can you see that line? Just here. We need to do something about that, otherwise it's going to show through the paint. There's another little nick there. Right, so what you do, you use either stopper, or if you've got a very light filler, which is what I tend to prefer, you can use a light filler to fill that in and sand it off again. And that's what we're going to do next. Right, okay, so you get a little bit of your filler, a little bit of hardness. You won't need a lot today because it's so warm. Mix them together. The activator is the blue colour. And now, quickly, we go over the panel and just the tiniest bit. It's already started going off. So now it's gone off, you get some fresh 240 grit paper on a sort of like a foam block like that. Just gently rub it down. We're looking to take off almost everything we put on except what's in that valley. If we need more filler, then it will be pretty obvious. I can feel a line there already, so that's better. But there is, you can actually feel it with your finger, there is a slight line there. Now let's take that down a little bit more. So basically, if you can feel anything, then you've got to remove whatever's causing an edge. you've got to feather it in until you can't feel it or see it. But your sense of feel is probably more sensitive than your eyes. There it is. That is perfect. Can't feel it and can't see it. So that's ready now. That door now is ready for paint. So the first stage is mixing up the epoxy primer, and it's a bit unusual because you need 4 parts of this, 1 part of the hardener, and then you need 25% of the total in the thinners. And then you spray that on, and it should flash off in 15 minutes. And then once it's flashed off, we give another coat, and that's it. That's enough epoxy primer. Right, so we're ready now to test the compressor, make sure we're getting air coming through. We'll set the pressure on the gauge, check it at the spray gun, and see how we do. The first thing is to switch the compressor on. Okay, so the noise has stopped because the compressor is now up to pressure. I think that runs at 90 psi. So now we can turn on the airline and see what happens. That's all working good. Yeah. Right. Now, all paint manufacturers produce what they call data sheets for using their paint, and I've downloaded this from the HB body site, and we printed it and laminated it. This tells you what to do. So you mix 4 parts of the primer, 1 part of the activator, epoxy hardener, and then the addition of 25% of the 775 thinner and reducer. No, it doesn't look too bad. Have a look in there. You can see there's a bit of material that's sunk to the bottom. We'll put that in there. Come on, next to it. Okay, last job before putting the paint on is you want to use one of these, which is called a tack cloth. And it's basically a cloth that's slightly sticky, and it's very useful for picking up any hairs or particles that might be on the panel. So you just give this a wipe over with the tack cloth there. I saw something come off just now, but that one's a bit cleaner. The next thing to do is to filter your paint into the cup. You get a fine filter. Spray down on. Need a bit more paint. That's it. Right. on now. We're ready for the second coat. Okay, so we cleaned out the spray gun. Everything's all clean, ready for the high build primer. And now we need to wait 2 hours for this paint to sort of fully cure. So it will be 2 hours for us, but for you it will be a split second. Okay, so this has now been allowed to stand for a couple of hours and the paint's properly flashed off. And you can see what a glorious finish the epoxy primer gives the metal. It's just lovely. It's like a satin silk. And that'll be the basis for our top coat. But the next thing we need to do now is get some high build primer on here, primer cellulose, which will then form the bond between the epoxy primer and the top coat. This is what we use, Git Gloss Grey primer. I mean, all these primers are pretty much the same, but it's a primer filler, so it goes on quite thick, and it's very forgiving. You can sort of get away with murder, really, and that's the more you can get away with doing these sort of jobs, the better. You'll see what I mean by paint rectification later on, because even the best body shop in the world, you're going to get little bits of hair and fallout and all sorts of things are going to end up in the final top coat, and being able to deal with it is a lot easier when you're painting in cellulose than if you were using a water-based paint. You don't really want to go there because that is mega expensive and it's very difficult to work with. So I'm an old-fashioned guy. I just stick with what the car had on it when it was leaving the factory, and that would have been ordinary cellulose paint. So basically, with a primer filler, you've got your primer there. You just need premium thinners, and we've got half a jar of paint here, which is a bit convenient because you mix it 50-50, half paint and half thinners, so we can just fill that up with the thinners and stir it and we'll be good to go. Okay, so get a nice clean filter. Yep. The beauty of it is, whatever we don't use, we can put back in here and it can be mixed up again. Okay, so you'll have noticed, no doubt, that I didn't rub down the epoxy primer at all before putting the cellulose primer filler coat on. and that's because provided you coat the panel within 8 hours of putting your epoxy primer on, you don't need to sand it, which obviously saves a lot of work. So we're going to put another coat of primer filler on this, but after that it will be sanded, and it will be sanded with something like 400 grit before we start putting the top coat on, and that'll be the next stage. But for today we'll be glad just to finish getting the primer filler on. Okay, we've got our primer filler on there. All we need to do now is let it settle and dry, and probably best left overnight to get nice and hard. And then we'll be rubbing it down with just a spongy sort of block, and we'll be using 400 grit paper, which is a really good key for the top coat. I mean, I've got a few runs. You're always going to get runs. This is what I'm talking about, rectification. And I have got a few runs and sags, even though they're laying flat on a bench. You inevitably get that with a paint job. And it's how you deal with it that makes all the difference with the finished article. But painting the shell is no different to painting these two doors. It's just more metal, but it's the same process. So once you've seen the top coat go on these two doors, you'll know how to paint your car basically, and you'll save a lot of money, because a respray these days can cost anywhere between 3 and 5 grand. And a compressor like that costs 240 quid. So you can save a lot of money. My spray gun, which is a Clark Super Pro gun, can you believe it? It was only 30 quid, and it is a really excellent spray gun. So it needn't cost you a lot of money to do your own paint job. Right, today it's a couple of days on from where we were putting the primer on the doors, and today we're going to be putting the top coat on. But before we go into that, I decided in the end not to use 400 grit, because I referred back to the data sheet and they actually tell you to use 320 to 400, not 400 to 600 as I thought. So I went with 320. So we rubbed the doors down with 320 grit, which gives you a lovely finish. I mean, it feels like glass. There's no other word for it. So going to 400 grit wouldn't have given us any better a finish. But before we actually go into putting the top coat on, I thought I'd explain a little bit more about the spray gun. So it's a suction fed spray gun where the paint is in this cup and it's sucked in from the cup through that filter, and it goes up there, and the air coming from the hose actually atomizes it and feeds it through the nozzle, which is there. And no, it's a 1.8 nozzle, and that's basically the size of nozzle you need to spray a car with. You need at least that sort of size. Anything smaller than that, you're going to struggle. So notice also that as well as that hole there, which has got a needle in, which is operated by the trigger goes in two parts. The first set actually sends air to these two side nozzles, and what that does is that gives you a spray pattern. Without those nozzles on the sides, you would get a spray pattern like that in a circle. But what these do is they turn that into a fan. You get a spray pattern like that, which is much easier to overlap your spraying with. Gives you a nice big brush, as it were. So what are the controls? So you've got 3 controls. So you've got the second part of your trigger actually lets the paint in through the nozzle. And the air comes in at the bottom, and you can control the amount of air going into the gun with that screw there. That screw there operates how much air is being used to create your fan. And this one at the top controls how much paint is being dispensed by the gun as it's being used. So it's pretty simple. There are gravity fed guns where the paint cup is above the spray gun itself. And yes, in theory, this is more difficult to operate like that. But in practice, what Clarks have done is they've given you, if I can just take this off, I'll show you. They've given you this thing here. But basically that has got a breather hole in it. Can you see the breather hole? Just here. And there's also a breather hole in the top, just there. And when this is in the right position, the 2 breather holes are on opposite sides. So that breather hole is there, and that breather hole is there. So it acts as a protector. So when the gun's like that, you don't get paint leaking out and dropping onto your panel. So you can get away with using this like that. So that's the spray gun. That's basically all you need to know. But when you clean these out, don't use your premium thinners. You use gum wash, which is a very, very coarse type of solvent. And you can use it with 2K, all types of paint. Obviously not water-based, but with cellulose and 2K. You just use gum wash to clean your gun out. And it's quite easy. You just put some gum wash in there, slosh it around, operate the trigger, get a cloth and put it against there and back flush into the gun itself, and keep doing that until it comes out clear, and then just wipe out the gun with some blue tissue, some of that stuff over there, and you're good to go and change colours. Okay, so where this got rubbed down, you can see there where I had some sags, which were, they weren't that prominent, but as soon as you start rubbing down, you can see we've gone back through into the epoxy primer underneath where it was sagging. But we've also got, once again, this corner, we've got the remains of a sag there. So I'm just going to show you how I deal with that. Just get a bit of 320 grit paper and take that edge away. Right. We're ready now to rub down with some good old degreaser. Okay, top coat. As I said, it's HMG, UB31, HQN99 cell gloss, polar white Talbot. You can have it mixed up in however many tins you want, but how much to do a respray? Well, I would say minimum for something like an Alpine It's probably about 5 litres of paint. I actually had 4 of these 2-litre tins mixed up over there. I numbered all of them so I knew which tin was which. They're all mixed from one batch of paint, so they should all be an absolute perfect match. But the idea is to keep probably at least half a tin back at the end for sort of possible repairs or touch-ups or rectifications. So you simply mix this paint once it's been thoroughly mixed up with the agitator. You mix it 50-50 with best quality thinners, and you're probably going to need at least 4 coats, and give each coat a good 10 minutes to flash off. And it needs to be a fairly warm day, because when the paint's sitting on the panel, it sucks heat out of the metal to evaporate the solvent, and that takes the temperature down. And on a very humid day, you could get condensation forming in the paint, and it's horrible. It literally is like a halo inside the paint. You can't get rid of it. So you don't want that happening. So you use premium quality thinners to minimise the chances of that happening. So they go off pretty quick. Your final coats, you would probably, the last 2 coats that you do, you would use something like that, which is a slow thinner. I mean, ICI Belco paint was brilliant when they were manufacturing it. I've still got some of this left over from my Morris respray. Slow thinners you can get in Bolton Wide Ball, sell them, but I might as well use this because I've got it in stock. Right, we're going to mix this paint up now. So we've now got 50% thinners in here. Okay, so now the paint's mixed, we're ready to put it in the gun. The gun needs anywhere between £29 per square inch and £40 per square inch. And I actually had mine set. It's actually about 32. That's where I had it. And this is the trap. So if any water or oil, you can eject it with that. So now we're ready to filter our paint. Okay, ready to paint. So just before we start, get your tack off. And once again, use that to take off the sort of residue from your degreaser and any particles. And you see it does pull it off. Now your first coat, really, it just wants to be a mist coat. Don't try and load it up, because the paint, it needs layers of paint on there to hold up properly. So you want to build it up slowly. You don't want to go loading it up with too much paint, otherwise you're just going to get runs and sags everywhere. Okay, each door's now had 6 coats of top coat, and you can see what a glorious paint finish that HMG cellulose gives you. You can't beat it. It's lovely. So there's no difference between doing it on there and doing it on here. It's just this is obviously a much bigger area to do, but you just work your way around it methodically, and eventually you get it done. And from my point of view, I think putting the paint on, after all 10 years of cutting rot out, grinding, welding, fabricating, filling, sanding, after all that, this is the most fun part of the whole build. It's just so much fun to see something like that come out of a spray gun. It's just wonderful. And you really need to have a go. If you've never thought of trying it, buy some rattle cans and paint a few little bits of sheet metal and just see what you can do. It's not difficult. It's just being methodical, using the right materials and being patient. Hi guys, we're back again. Brief update is I've prepared the shell, which was a bit of a marathon job, and it's taken me about a month to get to this stage. And with the help of Charmaine today, we've almost finished the masking off, but we ran out of masking tape. So I've got to run out tomorrow and get some more masking tape just to finish it off. But as you can see, we're pretty near this sort of point of shooting a coat of primer, which will be a good start. So epoxy primer first, and then primer filler, hopefully on the same day, within 8 hours. And then we'll be doing top coat, and then the shell will be done. Hi guys, we're back again. It's been about another month. So we went on holiday, which got in the way a bit. The shell now has had 2 coats of grey primer filler. It's been rubbed down with 600 grit. It's been degreased. It's been tack cloth, and we're all ready now to spray the polar white top coat, the first one. It takes about 20 minutes to get round, so it's quite a intricate process. You have to start in the middle, and the reason you start in the middle is because you have to get quite close to the shell with your arm, that I can just about reach to the middle without touching the shell. But if you've painted that wing and then went like that, you know what's going to happen, don't you? You're going to ruin it. So you start in the middle, then you do all your sharp edges, like the edges of the wheel arches, Anywhere there's a sharp edge where you need extra paint, basically, you're going to have to spray first and get a couple of coats on there to start with before you actually go in and putting the top coats on. That is the difference between doing the shell and doing the doors, because the doors are flat, there's no problem. Okay. Well, that was a marathon. Unfortunately, you've got to spray a panel at a time because the fumes just build up too strong. But we've been all the way round now, and for a first coat, I'm quite impressed because my experience has always been that the first coat usually looks rubbish, and it's not until you've got 2 or 3 coats on there that it actually starts looking good. But this HMG paint is absolutely brilliant. The coverage is so good. But we got 1 coat on. I've used about a litre of paint so far, so we got plenty left. But I need to get another 3 coats on today, and then that'll be enough for today, because I think by then I'll be as high as a kite. Okay guys, well, we've done the 4th coat now and it's looking pretty good. I'm going to let it settle for a few days, and then I'm going to lightly rub it down with some 600 grit paper. And then I'm going to put 2 more top coats on, but with slow thinners, so that we get a really nice gloss. And that'll mean we won't have to do too much in the way of working up afterwards. The paintwork will be, it'll have a nice deep gloss to it like the doors did. There we go. Paint your wagon. It's not that, it's not, when I say it's not that difficult, you've got to be committed to it, and it's not a simple job. And if you want a simple job, then you pay a professional. It goes in and it comes out. If you do it yourself, it takes months, but it is very satisfying to do. Hi guys, we're back, and I got my 2 final coats on yesterday. The hottest day of the year, but I got up at 7. I was out here by about 9 o'clock in the morning, and by 11 it was all done before it really got too hot. But having said that, even with slow thinners, the paint was drying incredibly quick, so it was very hard to get a really high gloss, because the danger is if you load up too much paint, you're going to get runs and sags, and that's the last thing you want to do at this stage. The finish isn't bad. It's the rubbing down with 600 grit is a game changer. That is really, you have to do that before your 2 top coats go on, because if you don't do that, you're going to have a lot of work. And having done that, and it was quite an issue getting around the car with 600 grit, because the paint, when it's fresh, tends to clog the paper. Once the paint's old, it doesn't do that, but while it's fresh it does. So yeah, I used a lot of paper to get round. Anyway, the paint's on, we've demasked, and we can do a walk around to show you the result. A little tip for those of you that think you might have a go: the Humble Raw plug, brown one, brown raw plug in here, like that, and a red raw plug in here, like that, and it stops the paint from getting in the threads, because once you come to put the door on, you don't want paint in your threads. So that's a little tip I learned. off of John Timms many years ago. And the other thing, this is going to be our best friend when the car's finished. Good old G3 for equal liquid compound. That will really put a gloss on this. And the beauty of cellulose is it's a lot easier to work up than 2K, which is a lot harder. So we used about 3 litres of M99 cellulose, and I used 5 litres of premium thinners, maybe 6, because I think I used a fair bit. Which one is it? I used about 1 litre of slow thinners, and I probably used about 1 litre out of that premium thinners. So they're about 25 quid, so 50 quid of paint, probably 20 quid of thinners to do this. So I think we'll do a walk around now, and don't worry about the dust in there, that's inevitable after a job like that. It's all loose, it will come off with the vacuum cleaner and a brush. It's just dust, yeah, literally, it's just dust. Okay. The question we asked right at the beginning was, can you do your own resprays? And I think I've proved you can. And it can save you a hell of a lot of money, and it's quite a satisfying thing to do. But you've got to be prepared to invest the time. The materials are relatively inexpensive. The compressor, the spray gun, the paint itself, the thinners, it's peanuts compared with a professional respray. So you can save a significant amount of money on your build, but it's just so much fun. You know, you need to start in a small way, doing little bits first, and get your confidence going. And once you've done some small projects, stepping up to something like this is no big deal. It really isn't. But yeah, I'm pleased with it. Now what I've got to do is leave it alone and get on with the rest of the car. We've got brake lines, fuel lines, battery cables, we've got all the mechanical components, the brakes. We've got to do a hell of a lot of installation, the wiring loop, and all that can be done whilst this paint is settling and hardening. So I'm looking forward to painting the engine bay with the coach enamel. So what are we going to paint the inside of that and the engine bay in? And the answer is this HMG coach enamel, for which you need this thinner, which is it's oil-based paint, so you need a totally different type of thinner. Okay. And you might say, well, why didn't I spray the engine bay? But the problem you've got is if you've ever tried to spray in an Alpine engine bay, you'll know that it's almost impossible to get any paint in here. It just won't go into a pocket. The rest of it you can paint, which is probably, all this is easy, but you really need to get the paint in there. And do you need like a mirror finish under the bonnet? Because by the time you've got a V8 in there and all the wiring and plumbing, you're not going to see much paintwork. And the coach enamel gives you a finish that's pretty brush mark free anyway, and it's easy to maintain, easy to touch up. So that's why I'm choosing to do it in a brushing coaching enamel. So I have had to send off for some decent coach enamel paint brushes, but that's on order. As soon as that comes, I'm going to be sitting in there doing a bit of painting. But yeah, there we go, guys. That's the way I did it. You know, everybody does it their own way, don't they? But there was no way I was going to be able to get a professional respray done. I was never going to get this out of here. It's not going to be out of here for another couple of years. So it had to be done here, and it had to be done now. Yeah, give us a thumbs up, leave comments, as long as they're kind. Yeah, leave a comment, see what you think. But bye for now. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope it's been informative, and I hope it's inspired some of you to maybe have a go. I've just had so much fun doing this. It's been amazing. A great day. Thanks guys. Keep tuned in to the Sunbeam Alpine channel.